The night was alive with the hum of conversation and occasional laughter. People dressed in their finest clothes moved between tables, exchanging pleasantries under the soft glow of string lights. The charity event was being held in a community center located in one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, a place known for its rich history but also its struggles. It wasn't far from downtown, yet it felt worlds apart. The streets here were lined with small businesses, some thriving, others barely hanging on. Tonight, though, the focus was on unity, hope, and raising funds for programs aimed at bridging divides within the community. William Carter stood near the edge of the room, sipping water from a plastic cup. He wasn't much of a party person, even if this particular gathering had noble intentions. As the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he'd grown accustomed to formal events filled with speeches and handshakes. But there was something different about tonight. Maybe it was the location, or maybe it was Maria Lopez, the woman who had invited him. She was passionate, fiery, and unafraid to speak her mind, qualities that both intimidated and impressed. Maria approached him now, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and she wore a bright red dress that seemed to demand attention wherever she went. "You look like you're ready to bolt," she said with a smile, glancing at his half-empty cup. "I'm not much for crowds," William admitted, setting the cup down on a nearby table. "But I appreciate the work you're doing here." She nodded, her expression softening. "It's important. We need people like you, people with influence, to show up, to listen." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he scanned the room, taking in the faces around him. Many attendees were locals, residents of the neighborhood who had come out to support the cause. Others were activists, lawyers, and politicians. There was a mix of races and backgrounds, but what struck William most was how many young people were present. They carried themselves with purpose, their eyes sharp and determined. He couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration and guilt. "Do you think things will ever really change?" he asked after a moment. Maria tilted her head slightly, studying him. "That depends on whether people like us are willing to do more than just talk." Her words lingered in his mind long after she excused herself to greet another guest. William knew she was right. For all his years serving on the bench, he often wondered if he'd done enough to address the injustices he saw every day. Sure, he wrote opinions and delivered rulings, but sometimes it felt like shouting into the void. Laws could only go so far. Real change required action beyond courtrooms. As the evening wore on, William decided it was time to leave. He thanked Maria again for inviting him, promising to stay in touch. Outside, the air was cool and crisp, a welcome contrast to the warmth of the crowded room. He adjusted his tie as he walked toward his car, parked a block away. The streets were quiet now, save for the distant sound of music drifting from an open window somewhere. Then, without warning, two figures stepped into his path. At first, William thought they might be lost or looking for directions, but when he saw the uniforms and badges, his stomach tightened. Two police officers, one taller with sandy blonde hair, the other shorter with a thick build, blocked his way. "Evening, sir," the taller one said, his tone clipped. "Can I see some ID?" William blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," he replied, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Is there a problem?" The officer ignored the question, instead stepping closer. His partner remained a few feet behind, arms crossed. Something about their demeanor made William uneasy. He handed over his driver's license, watching as the taller officer examined it under the dim streetlight. "This says you're William Carter," the officer said slowly, glancing up. "The Chief Justice?" "Yes," William confirmed, forcing a polite smile. "I was at a charity event just down the street." The officer exchanged a look with his partner before turning back. To William, "Mind telling me what you're doing in this neighborhood?" For a second, William thought he hadn't heard correctly. "What I'm doing? I told you. I was at a charity event. You can check if you'd like." Instead of responding, the officer grabbed William's arm and twisted it behind his back. Pain shot through his shoulder as he stumbled forward, stunned. "Hey," he protested. "What's going on?" "You're coming with us," The officer growled, snapping handcuffs around William's wrists. "We'll sort this out at the station." William's mind raced. This had to be a misunderstanding. Surely these men would realize their mistake once they checked his credentials. But as they shoved him into the back seat of their patrol car, he noticed the smirk on the taller officer's face. It sent a chill down his spine. From across the street, someone shouted. William turned his head just in time to see Maria rushing toward them, her heels clacking loudly against the pavement. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" The shorter officer stepped in front of her, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, step back. This doesn't concern you." "It absolutely concerns me," she snapped, pointing at William. "That's the Chief Justice of the United States. You're making a huge mistake." Neither officer flinched. If anything, their expressions hardened. One of them muttered something, under his breath, something William couldn't quite catch, but it sounded dismissive, almost mocking. As the car pulled away from the curb, William stared out the window, his heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not like this. Yet deep down, a part of him understood. He'd spent his life insulated by privilege, shielded from the harsh realities faced by so many others. Now, for the first time, he was seeing those realities up close, and it terrified him. Back on the sidewalk, Jamal watched the scene unfold, his phone raised to capture everything. He didn't know who the man in the suit was, but he recognized the fear in his eyes. And he knew that same fear all too well. When the video hit social media hours later, accompanied by hashtags and outraged comments, it would spark a firestorm. But for now, Jamal simply pressed record, letting the camera tell the story. Inside the patrol car, William sat rigid, his thoughts swirling. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the weight of the cuffs around his wrists silenced him. All he could do was wait, and hope that someone, somewhere, would believe him. And so, the night ended not with resolution, but with questions. Questions about justice, fairness, and the cracks in a system meant to protect everyone equally. For William Carter, the journey was only beginning. The inside of the police car smelled faintly of sweat and stale coffee. William sat stiffly in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him. His mind raced as the vehicle bounced over potholes, each bump jolting him further into disbelief. How had this happened? One moment he was leaving a charity event, and the next he was being treated like a criminal. He tried to focus on breathing steadily, but his chest felt tight, his heart pounding against his ribs. When they arrived at the precinct, the officers didn't waste any time. They dragged him out of the car roughly, ignoring his protests. "I'm telling you, this is a mistake," William shouted, his voice echoing off the cold concrete walls of the station. But no one listened. The taller officer, his name tag read Ryan, shoved him forward, while the shorter one, whose badge said Miller, barked orders at him to keep moving. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on everything. The air smelled metallic, mixed with the faint scent of disinfectant. William's eyes darted around the room, taking in the chaos. Desks cluttered with papers, phones ringing incessantly, and officers chatting casually as if nothing unusual was happening. No one even glanced at him. It was as though he were invisible, or, worse, insignificant. They led him to a small holding area where other detainees waited. Some slouched on benches, their heads bowed, while others paced nervously. A young man sat in the corner, hugging his knees to his chest. His clothes were wrinkled and his face bore the marks of exhaustion. When William entered, the young man looked up briefly before returning his gaze to the floor. "Sit down," Officer Ryan commanded, pointing to an empty bench. William hesitated for a second, then complied. His legs felt shaky, and he struggled to find a comfortable position with his hands still cuffed behind him. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time seemed to blur together in that sterile, suffocating space. Finally, the young man beside him spoke. "You don't look like you belong here," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the low murmur of voices in the room. William turned to him, surprised. The young man couldn't have been more than 25, with dark skin and wary eyes. "I don't," William admitted, his tone heavy with frustration. "This is all some kind of misunderstanding." The young man raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstanding? Huh? That's what they always say." "My name is William Carter," he continued, hoping the revelation might spark recognition. "I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." For a moment, the young man just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Oh, yeah, I've seen you on TV before. You're, like, important." William sighed, leaning back against the wall. "Apparently not important enough to avoid getting arrested tonight." The young man chuckled bitterly. "Welcome to the club, man. Name's Marcus. I got picked up earlier for supposedly stealing a soda from a gas station. Never even touched the thing." William frowned, his guilt deepening. He knew stories like Marcus's weren't uncommon. He'd read countless cases involving wrongful arrests, racial profiling, and systemic injustice. But reading about them in court documents was one thing. Experiencing it firsthand was another entirely. Sitting there, handcuffed and humiliated, he began to see the cracks in the system he had sworn to uphold. As the night dragged on, William's frustration grew. He called out to anyone who walked past, demanding to speak to a supervisor or make a phone call. Each time, he was ignored. At one point, Officer Ryan approached him, sneering. "Still think your fancy title means something?" he asked, his tone dripping with contempt. William swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "Listen, I understand you have a job to do, but this isn't right. Let me explain." "Save it," Ryan interrupted, cutting him off. "We'll deal with you when we're good and ready." It was maddening, for someone used to commanding respect, being dismissed so casually stung. William clenched his jaw, fighting back anger and despair. He thought about Maria, wondering if she had managed to reach anyone who could help. Surely someone would realize what was happening and intervene. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, the situation was escalating. Jamal's video had gone viral, within minutes of being uploaded. Social media platforms lit up with outrage as users shared the clip alongside angry captions and hashtags like "Justice for Carter" and "End racial profiling." People began gathering outside the station, holding signs and chanting slogans. Among them was Emily Dawson, a journalist known for her investigative pieces on corruption. She pushed through the crowd, notebook in hand, determined to get answers. Inside, William remained oblivious to the growing storm. Instead, he focused on Marcus, who seemed oddly calm despite their circumstances. "How do you stay so composed?" William asked after a long silence. Marcus shrugged. "What else can I do? Getting mad won't change anything. Besides, this ain't my first rodeo." William shook his head, feeling a mix of shame and admiration. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "Sorry that this happens to people like you." Marcus gave him a sad smile. "Don't apologize. Just promise me you'll remember this once you're free. Use whatever power you've got to make things better." Those words stuck with William long after Marcus stopped talking. He realized how sheltered his life had been, how little he truly understood about the struggles faced by marginalized communities. Here he was, a man tasked with interpreting laws and ensuring justice, yet he'd failed to grasp the full weight of inequality until now. Hours later, a sergeant finally appeared, looking flustered. "Chief Justice Carter?" he asked, glancing at William. "We need to straighten this out immediately." William stood, relief washing over him, but only briefly. As the sergeant uncuffed him and led him to a private office, he couldn't shake the memory of those hours spent locked away. The humiliation, the fear, the realization that for all his accomplishments, he wasn't immune to the flaws plaguing the system. By dawn, William was released, but the damage had already been done. Outside, the crowd cheered as he emerged, blinking in the morning light. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and protesters held up signs calling for accountability. William took a deep breath, knowing this was only the beginning. What had started as a single night of injustice had ignited something far bigger, a movement demanding change. And as he looked out at the sea of faces, William made a silent vow. This wouldn't end with apologies or promises. If he wanted forgiveness, for himself and for the broken system he represented, he would have to fight for real reform, even if it meant facing truths he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But for William Carter, there was no beauty in the morning. His release from the precinct had been a blur of flashing cameras, shouted questions, and angry chants from protesters outside. As he stepped into the cool air, he felt exposed, like everyone could see right through him. The weight of what had happened pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than ever. Maria Lopez was waiting for him near the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her red dress looked crumpled now, evidence of a sleepless night. When she saw him, her expression softened, but only slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low so the reporters couldn't hear. William nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "I'll be fine," he said. "But I don't think fine is good enough anymore." Maria didn't respond right. Away. Instead, she glanced at the growing number of people holding signs that read, "Justice for all and no more excuses." Their energy was electric, fueled by anger and hope. "This isn't just about you, William," she said finally. "It's about everyone who doesn't get their freedom back after one bad night." Her words hit him hard. He knew she was right. For him, this ordeal might end with an apology and some bad press. For others, like Marcus, it could mean months or even years behind bars, simply because of the color of their skin or where they lived. The injustice of it made his stomach churn. As Maria guided him toward her car, shielding him from the chaos, Emily Dawson approached them. She was a petite woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. In her hand, she held a small notebook filled with scribbled notes. "Chief Justice Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Dawson. I'd like to talk to you about what happened last night." William hesitated. He wasn't ready to relive the humiliation, let alone share it with the world. But something about Emily's tone, calm yet firm, made him pause. "Can we do it later?" he asked. "I need some time to process everything first." Emily nodded, understanding. "Of course, just know that people are watching, and they want answers. If you want to make a difference, now's your chance." With that, she stepped back, disappearing into the crowd. William watched her go, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. People were watching. They always had been, but now they expected more from him. Not just apologies, but action. Later that day, Emily sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and open tabs on her computer. She had spent hours digging into the backgrounds of officers Ryan and Miller, uncovering disturbing patterns. Complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and abuse of power littered their records. Yet not once had either officer faced serious consequences. Internal investigations had cleared them every time, often citing lack of evidence, or worse, blaming the victims. Emily leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. This wasn't the first time she'd uncovered corruption within law enforcement, but it never got easier. Each case felt like peeling back layers of rot, exposing how deeply entrenched these issues were. Still, she refused to give up. Someone had to shine a light on the truth, no matter how ugly it was. By evening, her article was ready. Titled, "Behind the Badge, A Pattern of Abuse," it detailed the officers' history of misconduct and questioned why nothing had been done to hold them accountable. She sent it to her editor, who approved it immediately. Within minutes, the story went live online, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Meanwhile, protests continued to grow. Kevin Lewis, a community organizer whose brother had died during a police encounter years ago, stood at the front of the crowd, megaphone in hand. His voice boomed as he addressed the sea of faces gathered outside the precinct. "We've been here before," he shouted. "How many times do we have to march? How many lives have to be ruined before they listen?" The crowd roared in agreement, fists raised in solidarity. Among them was Jamal, the young man who had recorded Williams' Arrest. He hadn't planned to become part of the movement, but seeing his video spark such outrage gave him a sense of purpose. For once, he felt like his voice mattered. Kevin noticed Jamal standing nearby and motioned for him to come closer. "That video you took, it changed everything," Kevin said, clapping him on the shoulder. "People are paying attention because of you." Jamal shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Kevin corrected him. "You did what most people wouldn't. Don't underestimate the power of speaking up." As the rally continued, Maria arrived, joining Kevin and Jamal at the front. Together, they strategized next steps. They agreed to organize a larger demonstration called Justice Beyond Titles, emphasizing that while William's case had drawn attention, the fight was far from over. Real change required addressing the root causes of inequality, not just focusing on high-profile incidents. Back at home, William struggled to find peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cold, indifferent stares of Officers Ryan and Miller. He replayed their sneers, their dismissive comments, over and over again in his mind. It wasn't just the racism that haunted him. It was the realization that he'd spent his entire career blind to the struggles of those less privileged than him. His phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Some offered support, others demanded explanations. One message stood out, a text from Emily Dawson asking if he'd consider testifying before Congress about his experience. At first, William dismissed the idea. What good would it do? Would anyone even care? But then he remembered Marcus's words. Use whatever power you've got to make things better. And Maria's warning. This isn't just about you. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to realize that staying silent wasn't an option. If he wanted forgiveness, not just from others but from himself, he had to act. He replied to Emily's message, agreeing to meet with her to discuss the possibility of testifying. As he hit send, he felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be backlash, criticism, and resistance at every turn. But maybe, just maybe, his platform could amplify the voices that had been ignored for too long. That night, as the city slept, Emily worked tirelessly to prepare for her meeting with William. She knew convincing him to testify wouldn't be simple. High-profile figures rarely put themselves in vulnerable positions unless absolutely necessary. But she also knew that William's story had the potential to ignite real change, if he was willing to take the risk. Across town, Kevin and Maria finalized plans for the upcoming demonstration. Flyers were printed, social media posts scheduled, and volunteers organized. The movement was gaining momentum, driven by ordinary people determined to create extraordinary change. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Jamal scrolled through his phone, watching videos of protests erupting in cities nationwide. His footage of William's arrest had sparked a fire, uniting people from different walks of life under a shared cause. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Change was coming. It might not happen overnight, and it certainly wouldn't come without a fight. But as dawn broke over the horizon, casting its golden light across the city, one thing was clear. The battle for justice had only just begun. The days following William Carter's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The story dominated headlines, with news outlets dissecting every detail of the incident. Protesters continued to gather outside the precinct, their numbers swelling as more people joined the movement sparked by Jamal's video. Signs and banners filled the streets, each one carrying a message of frustration, anger, or hope. Among them, Kevin Lewis stood tall, leading chants and rallying the crowd. His voice carried authority, born from years of fighting for justice. After his brother's death, inside the precinct, tensions simmered. Officers Ryan and Miller had been suspended pending an investigation into their conduct, but they weren't staying quiet. In interviews with sympathetic reporters, they defended themselves, claiming William had resisted arrest and refused to cooperate. "We were just doing our job," Officer Ryan insisted, his tone defiant. If he didn't want trouble, he shouldn't have acted suspiciously. Their comments only fueled public outrage. Social media erupted with criticism, accusing the officers of deflecting responsibility and doubling down on racist behavior. Emily Dawson published another article exposing inconsistencies in their statements, pointing out how their version of events contradicted witness accounts, including Jamal's video. Her work added fuel to the fire, keeping the pressure on law enforcement agencies to act. Meanwhile, William wrestled with his decision to testify before Congress. He met with Emily Dawson at a quiet cafe near his home, where she laid out what testifying might entail. "This isn't just about you anymore," she said gently but firmly. "Your story can shine a spotlight on systemic issues that need fixing. People will listen because of who you are." William nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I know it's important," he admitted, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for this kind of attention. What if I mess it up?" Emily leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You won't," she assured him. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone is asking for." As the meeting ended, William felt a mix of fear and resolve. He knew testifying wouldn't be easy, but he also understood he couldn't stay silent. If he wanted to honor Marcus's plea, to use his power for good, this was his chance. Back in the neighborhood where the protest began, Maria Lopez worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. She organized meetings with local leaders, activists, and community members to plan the upcoming demonstration, Justice Beyond Titles. The event aimed to shift focus from William's high-profile case to the broader struggles faced by marginalized communities. "We can't let this moment pass without demanding real change," she told the group during one meeting. "This is about more than one man. It's about everyone who's been failed by the system." Kevin agreed, emphasizing the importance of grassroots involvement. "People are tired of empty promises," he said. "They want action, and we're going to give it to them." Jamal attended the meetings too, feeling both proud and overwhelmed by the impact of his video. At first, he'd simply wanted to document what he saw, never imagining it would spark such widespread outrage. Now he found himself thrust into the role of an activist, speaking at rallies and sharing his perspective with journalists. It was scary but also empowering. For once, he felt like his voice mattered. As preparations for the demonstration continued, backlash against William grew louder. Conservative politicians and commentators accused him of exploiting his situation to push a liberal agenda. Some even suggested he deserved what happened, implying his arrest was justified. Threats poured in, targeting not only William, but also his family. His wife Claire begged him to reconsider testifying. "It's too dangerous," she pleaded one evening, tears streaming down her face. "What if something happens to you, or to us?" William wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I wish I could promise you it'll be okay," he murmured. "But I can't sit back and do nothing. Not after everything I've seen." Claire didn't argue further, though her worry was evident. To protect their safety, they hired private security and avoided leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. The isolation weighed heavily on William, reminding him of the fear he'd felt in that holding cell. But he refused to let it deter him. If anything, it strengthened his determination to fight for change. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers debated how to address the growing calls for police reform. The governor issued a statement condemning the treatment of William Carter and announced plans to investigate systemic racism within law enforcement agencies. Some progressive legislators pushed for sweeping reforms, including independent oversight, boards, mandatory anti-bias training, and stricter accountability measures for officers accused of misconduct. Others resisted, arguing that such changes would undermine law enforcement's ability to maintain order. Amid the political tug-of-war, William prepared for his testimony. He practiced his speech repeatedly, refining his words until they felt authentic yet powerful. He reached out to Marcus, thanking him for his advice and asking permission to share his story during the hearing. Marcus agreed, honored that his experience might help bring about change. When the day finally arrived, William dressed carefully, choosing a dark suit and tie to convey professionalism and respect. As he entered the Senate chamber, cameras flashed, capturing his every move. The room buzzed with anticipation, filled with lawmakers, reporters, and spectators eager to hear what the Chief Justice had to say. William took his seat at the witness table, gripping the edges tightly to steady his nerves. When called upon, he stood, clearing his throat. For a moment he hesitated, glancing at the rows of faces staring back at him. Then, taking a deep breath, he began. "I stand before you today not as a judge, but as a man who has experienced firsthand the failures of our justice system," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind his words. "What happened to me was wrong, but what makes it worse is knowing that countless others endure similar or worse treatment every single day, often without the privilege of having their voices heard." He went on to describe his arrest, recounting the humiliation, fear, and helplessness he'd felt. He spoke about Marcus, sharing the young man's story and urging lawmakers to recognize the humanity of those affected by systemic injustice. "Real change requires more than apologies," he concluded. "It demands action, accountability, compassion. We must do better, for everyone." The room fell silent as William finished speaking. Some lawmakers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Outside, protesters cheered, inspired by his courage. Despite the progress made, challenges remained. Anonymous leaks surfaced online, suggesting William had exaggerated certain details of his arrest. Though investigations later proved these claims false, the smear campaign temporarily weakened support for reform efforts. Critics seized the opportunity to question his credibility, accusing him of playing politics. Maria and Kevin refused to let the negativity derail their mission. They pressed on, organizing workshops, town halls, and educational programs aimed at empowering communities. Jamal continued documenting protests, using his camera to amplify voices often ignored. And William? He returned home, exhausted but hopeful. Change wouldn't come overnight, but he believed the seeds had been planted. Real justice required persistence and patience. As he sat alone in his study reflecting on the road ahead, he realized forgiveness wasn't something he deserved. Not yet. But maybe someday, it would be within reach. For now, he vowed to keep fighting, because giving up wasn't an option. Not anymore. The weeks after William Carter's testimony were a blur of activity. Lawmakers debated his words, activists rallied behind them, and critics worked tirelessly to undermine his credibility. The nation seemed divided, with some hailing William as a hero for speaking out and others dismissing him as a hypocrite who had waited too long to act. Despite the backlash, his testimony struck a chord with many people. For the first time, someone in a position of power had admitted vulnerability, acknowledging not just the flaws in the system, but also his own blindness to them. William tried to stay focused on the bigger picture, but it wasn't easy. Every morning, he woke up to a barrage of emails, phone calls, and news alerts. Some messages were supportive, thanking him for using his platform to highlight injustice. Others were cruel, filled with insults and threats that made his stomach churn. His family still lived under the shadow of fear, relying on private security to keep them safe. Claire did her best to shield their children from the chaos, but even they could sense the tension in the air. One evening, as William sat at the kitchen table reviewing notes for an upcoming interview, his youngest daughter approached him. She was 8 years old with wide eyes and a curious mind. "Dad," she asked softly, "why are people so mad at you?" Her question caught him off guard. How could he explain systemic racism and inequality to a child? After a moment, he sighed and pulled her onto his lap. "Sometimes people get upset because they think I should have done more to help earlier," he said simply. "And maybe they're right. But now I'm trying to make things better." She tilted her head, considering this. "Does that mean you're going to fix everything?" He chuckled sadly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I wish I could, sweetheart. But fixing things takes time and a lot of people working together." Her innocence reminded him why he couldn't give up. The world might be messy and unfair, but there were still moments of hope. like his daughter's unwavering belief that he could make a difference. That belief carried him through the darkest days. Meanwhile, Maria Lopez and Kevin Lewis poured their energy into organizing Justice Beyond Titles, the massive demonstration set to take place downtown. Flyers plastered every corner of the city, and social media buzzed with anticipation. Volunteers came together to coordinate logistics, ensuring the event would run smoothly while staying peaceful. Jamal played a key role, filming promotional videos and encouraging others to attend. His camera became a symbol of resistance, capturing stories of resilience and determination. On the day of the protest, thousands gathered in the square outside City Hall. The crowd was diverse, people of all ages, races, and backgrounds united by a shared desire for change. Signs waved overhead bearing messages like, "Enough is enough" and "Real justice now." Speakers took turns addressing the audience, sharing personal experiences of police brutality and systemic racism. Each story added another layer to the collective cry for reform. When Maria stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent. Her voice rang out strong and clear, commanding attention. "This movement isn't about one man or one night," she declared. "It's about every person who has been told they don't matter. It's about every life cut short because of hate and indifference. Today, we say no more. We demand justice, not just for Chief Justice Carter, but for everyone." The cheers that followed were deafening, echoing through the streets. Standing nearby, Kevin felt a surge of pride. This was what he had fought for since losing his brother. He turned to Jamal, who was filming the scene, and grinned. "We're making history," he said. Jamal nodded, though his expression was serious. "Yeah, but the hard part comes next, keeping this energy alive." Kevin clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." Back in Washington, lawmakers continued grappling with how to address the growing calls for reform. Progress was slow, bogged down by partisan bickering and resistance from powerful lobbying groups. Some legislators introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency within police departments, such as requiring body cameras and creating independent oversight boards. Others pushed for stricter penalties for officers found guilty of misconduct. While these efforts represented a step forward, many activists argued they didn't go far enough. Emily Dawson kept the pressure on, publishing exposés that highlighted ongoing abuses of power within law enforcement agencies. Her articles served as a reminder that the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. One piece, titled "The Cost of Inaction," detailed several recent cases of wrongful deaths caused by police violence. The stories were heartbreaking, each one underscoring the urgent need for change. Despite her relentless advocacy, Emily faced pushback from those who accused her of bias. Anonymous trolls flooded her inbox with hateful comments, questioning her motives and credibility. Yet she refused to back down. "If they're attacking me, it means I'm doing something right," she told a colleague during a late-night call. For William, the struggle became deeply personal. Testifying before Congress had opened doors, but it had also exposed wounds he hadn't realized were there. He began visiting neighborhoods affected by systemic injustice, listening to residents share their frustrations and fears. These conversations humbled him, reinforcing how much work remained to be done. One afternoon, he accompanied Marcus to the grave of Kevin's brother. The cemetery was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As Marcus placed flowers on the headstone, William knelt beside him, bowing his head in silence. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Sorry that I didn't see sooner. Sorry that I failed you and so many others." Marcus looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You can't change the past," he said, "but you can shape the future. Just don't stop fighting." Those words stayed with William long after they left the cemetery. He knew forgiveness wouldn't come easily, not from others and certainly not from himself. But Marcus's advice gave him direction. If he wanted redemption, he would have to earn it through action, not apologies. As months passed, small victories began to emerge. A few cities implemented pilot programs aimed at reducing police presence in nonviolent situations, opting instead for mental health professionals and social workers. Activists celebrated these wins even as they acknowledged they were only the beginning. Real change required dismantling deeply entrenched systems of oppression, a task that would take years, if not decades. William threw himself into the work, partnering with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform. He attended rallies, spoke at conferences, and used his influence to advocate for policy changes. Critics continued to attack him, accusing him of grandstanding or abandoning his judicial duties. But William ignored them, focusing instead on the people whose lives depended on meaningful reform. At home, Claire noticed a shift in her husband. He seemed more grounded, less burdened by the weight of his title. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, watching him pore over legal documents. At the dining table, he glanced up, smiling faintly. "Not yet," he admitted, "but I'm getting there." By year's end, the movement showed no signs of slowing down. Protests continued, fueled by new incidents of police misconduct and renewed calls for accountability. Jamal's videos inspired others to document injustices in their own communities, creating a network of citizen journalists determined to hold authorities accountable. Maria and Kevin expanded their efforts, launching educational initiatives aimed at teaching young people about their rights. Through it all, William remained committed to the cause. He knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Forgiveness, for himself and for the broken system he represented, wasn't guaranteed. But as he stood alongside protesters, listening to their chants echo through the streets, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were moving closer to a world where justice truly belonged to everyone. Months turned into a year, and while the movement for justice had grown stronger, it was clear that change wasn't happening as quickly as anyone had hoped. Officers Ryan and Miller, despite overwhelming evidence of misconduct, avoided criminal charges due to lack of cooperation from higher-ups within their department. The internal investigation dragged on, bogged down by red tape and excuses. For many, this outcome felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder that even when the truth was laid bare, accountability remained elusive. William Carter tried not to let the frustration consume him. He attended press conferences and community meetings urging patience and perseverance. "This fight isn't just about one case," he told a group of activists during a town hall. "It's about dismantling systems that have been in place for generations. That takes time." But his words didn't always land well. Some people accused him of being out of touch, arguing that his privilege shielded him from the day-to-day realities of living under oppressive systems. Others dismissed him altogether, saying he was more interested in protecting his reputation than creating real change. These criticisms stung, but William forced himself to listen. After all, hadn't Marcus told him to use his power? And hadn't Maria warned him that this wasn't just about him? Still, the weight of unmet expectations pressed down on him. At night, he often found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations in his head. Was he doing enough? Could he ever do enough? The guilt gnawed at him, a constant companion he couldn't shake off. Maria Lopez, too, wrestled with doubts. Her energy was boundless, but even she couldn't deny the toll the fight was taking on her. She spent long hours organizing protests, drafting petitions and meeting with lawmakers only to see progress stall repeatedly. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through old photos on her phone. There were pictures of rallies, speeches, and late-night strategy sessions. In one photo, she stood next to Jamal, both of them smiling despite exhaustion. Back then, hope had felt tangible, like victory was within reach. Now, though, the road ahead seemed endless. Maria sighed, setting her phone aside. She thought about Kevin Lewis, who had become a close friend over the past year. His unwavering determination inspired her, even on days when she felt ready to give up. "We're planting seeds," he'd told her once. "Even if we don't see the flowers bloom, someone else will." She clung to those words now, reminding herself that movements weren't built overnight. Change required sacrifice, and sometimes it required waiting. Kevin, meanwhile, focused on grassroots efforts. He believed that real transformation started at the local level, with communities holding police departments accountable. Alongside Marcus, he organized workshops aimed at educating residents about their rights during encounters with law enforcement. They handed out pamphlets, held Q&A sessions, and encouraged people to document interactions using their phones. It was slow, tedious work, but Kevin knew it mattered. Empowering individuals was the first step toward dismantling fear. Jamal played a key role in these initiatives, filming everything and sharing it online. His videos reached audiences far beyond the city, inspiring others to start similar programs in their own neighborhoods. Sometimes he wondered if his contributions were making a difference. Did his camera really matter in the grand scheme of things? But whenever he doubted himself, he remembered the night he filmed William's arrest, the moment that sparked a movement. If one video could ignite such widespread outrage, maybe others could too. For William, the turning point came, unexpectedly. One chilly afternoon, he visited a high school in a low-income neighborhood to speak with students about civic engagement. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as teenagers filed in, some clutching notebooks, others whispering excitedly to friends. When William stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He smiled warmly, trying to ease their tension. "I'm not here to lecture you," he began. "I'm here because I want to learn from you. Tell me, what does justice mean to you?" At first, no one spoke. Then a girl near the front raised her hand hesitantly. "Justice means fairness," she said softly. "It means everyone gets treated the same, no matter who they are." Another student chimed in. "Justice means cops don't get away with hurting people." A boy in the back added, "Justice means fixing what's broken instead of pretending it's fine." Their answers struck William deeply. These young voices articulated what so many adults struggled to express, a vision of a world where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. As the discussion continued, William realized something important. This fight wasn't his alone. It belonged to everyone willing to pick up the torch and carry it forward. When the session ended, several students approached him, asking how they could get involved. William promised to connect them with local organizations and urged them to keep speaking up. On the drive home, he felt lighter than he had in months. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something he deserved, not yet, but perhaps redemption lay in nurturing the next generation of leaders. Back at the precinct, tensions simmered among officers. Some resented the scrutiny brought on by William's case, while others quietly supported reforms. Among the latter was Officer Daniels, a veteran cop who had grown disillusioned with the culture of silence within the department. He began attending community meetings, listening to residents' concerns and advocating for transparency. Though his colleagues mocked him, calling him a traitor, Daniels refused to back down. "If we don't fix this ourselves," he told a fellow officer, "someone else will." His actions didn't go unnoticed. Residents praised him for stepping up, and activists invited him to speak at events. Slowly, trust began to rebuild between the community and the department, not entirely, but enough to plant seeds of hope. By the end of the year, small victories emerged. A few cities implemented body cameras for officers, and independent oversight boards gained traction in others. Activists celebrated these wins, even as they acknowledged the work was far from over. Emily Dawson published an article titled, "Progress, Not Perfection," highlighting incremental changes while emphasizing the need for continued pressure. Her words resonated with readers, reminding them that every step forward mattered. For William, the journey remained bittersweet. He visited Kevin's brother's grave again, this time alone. Kneeling beside the headstone, he whispered, "Forgiveness isn't mine to ask for, but I promise I won't stop fighting until things are better, for everyone." As he walked away, he noticed Jamal standing nearby, filming another protest. The young man gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose. William returned the gesture, feeling a flicker of gratitude. Maybe forgiveness would come someday, or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, the struggle continued. And for now, that was enough. In the distance, the sound of chants filled the air. Protesters marched through the streets, their signs held high. Their voices carried determination, resilience, and hope. Change might be slow, but it was coming. Together, they were building a future where justice truly belonged to all,